Hi, this is Mr. Gazelle, and this lesson is part 2 of our lesson on combining signed numbers. In this case, we'll be dealing with both adding and subtracting signed numbers, but in algebra, instead of looking at things as adding and subtracting, we're more likely to think of them as combining. And in this case, it might mean kind of rewriting something so that we can look at it as combining signed numbers. Here are some examples of combining signed numbers. Here I am combining -3 with -5. Here, really, I'm also combining -3 with -5. Here, we're combining -3 with +5. Here, we are combining -5 with +3. And in these cases, we're actually going to have to rewrite them a little bit to think of them as just combining signed numbers. So let's look at these ones on the left here to start out with. If I look at the idea of combining -3 with -5, I can see here I've got 3 negatives and 5 negatives. And if I put those all together, I'm going to get 8 negatives. If I combine negatives with more negatives, I get even more negatives. The same thing actually happens in our second example here. Here we're going to combine -5 with -3. So again, if I represent -5 with 5 negatives and -3 with 3 negatives, if I put all those together, I get even more negatives, or -8. In our next example here, we're actually combining +5 with -3. If I combine +5 with -3, well, 3 of these positives are going to cancel out the 3 negatives, and I'm left with +2 left over. A +5 and a -3 gives me +2. And in our last example here, if I combine a +3 with a -5, +3 with a -5, my 3 positives are going to cancel out 3 of my negatives, and that's going to leave me with 2 negatives left over. So +3 and -5 combine to -2. Now, the problems that I have to rewrite a little bit are when I'm subtracting a negative number. So to help us understand how those problems work, I want to look at this example, just because it's a little easier to show what's going on with this particular example. In this example, we've got -5, and we're taking away -3. So if I've got -5, and I'm taking away -3, then I'm left with -2. -5 minus -3 leaves me with -2. This idea of taking away, though, is not the way that mathematicians doing algebra typically think of these types of problems. Again, we typically think of these types of problems as combining. And so to do that, let's look at this example again. I want us to see that if we start with -5 and we take away -3, that of course gives us -2. But I can also get -2 if I start with -5 and add 3. If I start with -5 and add 3, then 3 of my negatives are going to cancel 3 of my positives, and again, that's going to leave me with -2. So subtracting a -3 is exactly the same as adding a +3, which gives us a rule that I want us to remember. Hopefully it makes sense by looking at this problem, and that is that subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. Subtracting a negative 3 here is exactly the same as adding a positive 3. In other words, we're going to get the same answer if we subtract a negative 3 that we would get if we add a positive 3. When I write it as adding a positive 3, now I can just combine negative 5 with positive 3 and do these problems exactly the same way as we were doing the others. So let's look at these 4 examples. If I've got negative 3 and I'm subtracting a negative 5, I'm just going to rewrite that as adding a positive 5. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. And if I combine negative 3 with positive 3, that's going to give me 2. These ones cancel out, and I'm left with 2 left over. If I have negative 5 minus negative 3, that's going to be the same as negative 5 plus a positive 3, which means that I'm combining negative 5 with positive 3. And if I combine negative 5 with positive 3, that's going to leave me with negative 2. There we go. What about 5 minus a negative 3? Well, again, 5 minus a negative 3 is the same as 5 plus a positive 3. So really here I'm combining a positive 5 with a positive 3. And if I combine positive 5 with positive 3, I'm going to get even more positives. Try that again. Even more positives here. So that's going to give me a positive 8. And our last one ends up being about the same. If I have 3 and I subtract a negative 5, subtracting a negative 5 is the same as adding a positive 5. And if I have a positive 3 and I add a positive 5 to it, positive 3, and I add a positive 5 to it, that again is going to give me 8. So hopefully this lesson on combining both adding and subtracting signed numbers is helpful to you. Thank you.